In this episode, we're going to talk with Marianne Williamson about tears to triumph.
Welcome to Thriving Launch with Louise Congdon and Kamala Chambers, the show for heart-centered entrepreneurs who want it all.
5 days a week, we bring you different segments to inspire you to live a life of freedom. We interview the leading experts in the field of business, health, and love. Be sure to check out Training Tuesdays, where we give you a clear action plan to grow your own business.
How would you like to be able to interview world-class experts, sit down and have chats with people like Jack Canfield, Marianne Williamson, Robert Kiyosaki, Tim Ferriss, you name it? Would you love to interview other people that you really admire and consider to be your heroes? Well, we've created a course for you that teaches you how to podcast, how to set it all up, and how to get going so that you can really have a successful show and you can do it properly. Over at thrivinglaunch.com, we have a podcasting course, and it's there for you, waiting for you to snatch it up. So head on over to thrivinglaunch.com and let me teach you how to podcast the right way.
So grateful to be here with a spiritual leader, Marianne Williamson. She is an author and lecturer. She's been on shows like Oprah, Larry King Live, Good Morning America, and 7 of her books have been on the New York Times bestseller list. Such an honor to have Marianne Williamson here on Thriving Launch. It's such a great honor to have you here on the show. And one thing that is so deep and impactful to a lot of our listeners is depression, is this sense of lethargy. I'd love to hear from you some of your thoughts on why that's such a rampant issue across our society.
Well, it's interesting that you point out the issue of lethargy, because depressed means exactly that. Your energy is depressed. Your vitality is depressed. Your creativity is depressed. And this should be no surprise to anyone, because the ideas, the main organizing principles on which we organize, by which we organize our society, even our world, are themselves depressed. They depress our vitality because they depress our spirit. There is no true vitality. There is no true creativity where there's not soul, where there's not spirit, where there's not love. And the world in which we now find ourselves has, in too many ways, in terms of the broader social construct, peripheralized soul and trivialized love and placed before the issues of love and brotherhood and holiness and unity and compassion and mercy. We've put a veil in front of those things. And the veil are goals that we deem more important. And that has to do with money, and it has to do with personal gain, sometimes at the expense of others, but certainly without care to repercussions on others beyond, oh, well, I don't want to proactively hurt anyone. We are a civilization and a world, actually, a species that is dominated by fear rather than by love. And so when we're not giving love, you only, on a spiritual level, on the level of consciousness, you only give what you get. You only get what you give. So anytime I go into a situation and I'm not giving love, and my purpose there is not to give love, then I'm failing to feed myself. So by withholding love from others, I'm withholding love from myself. So I don't have any gas in the tank. And then we can't, where's our get up and go? Well, your desire, your deep, soulful desire to do what you came here to earth to do, which is a mission that is etched on all our hearts. We are love, and we came here to express love, to extend love. That's our cosmic mission. And when we're dwelling outside the circle of that knowing, we are depressed because we feel like we're in alien territory, because we are. And so what's happening that is particularly dysfunctional is that the fact that we feel so depressed, that we feel this lethargy, is the most understandable thing in the world. But instead of seeing the psychic pain that is the natural consequence of this lethargy as the early warning system that it is, it's like physical pain. Psychic pain conveys a message, just like physical pain. It means something is wrong. It means you have to address something. So if you have a broken leg, you don't just numb it, you have to reset the bone. And this psychic pain is a call to all of us to reset the thinking, which has resulted in this pain. But the very forces that produce this pain, the very matrix of thinking and the very outlook that produces this pain, then extends itself into the issue of our pain by saying that it will help us. And its idea of helping us is to numb us from the pain or distract us from the pain. And that's why we have to wake up and see this, get this story for what it is. It's like the rampant issue of depression is like canaries in the coal mine falling over, but the owners of the coal mine, instead of saying, oh, wow, there's too much toxicity in here, we're going to have to fix this, instead says there's something wrong with the canaries. And thus the labeling, the medicalization of our despair. That this is not the system that produces the despair, doesn't then say, wow, we need to look at the matrix of thought and behavior that produces the despair on a societal basis. Instead says, oh, there's a pill we can take for this despair. It's a disorder. It's an anxiety disorder. It's a depression disorder, as though we're just victims of this disease we have, which is the last thing you need in order to get out of that lethargy is to think that you're the victim of that which produced it.
You know, you're really reminding me of this analogy where we talk about the fruit of a tree and how when we taste the fruit, we tend to blame the fruit instead of going back to the root and saying, well, the very thing that sprouted this fruit was the root of a tree and the soil and what we're giving to it. This morning, I was going back through some of my cliff notes of your book, and one of the things that really stuck out for me was perspective in the way that we view things. And now for a lot of people that are listening to the show, they know my story that I was actually adopted when I was 8 years old from Medellin, Colombia, and went to the United States. And I had a very tumultuous childhood, my first 8 years where my mother was murdered. It was the 80s and Pablo Escobar was in power. So it was a very crazy world here in Medellin. And at the age of 18, I came back to Medellin, Colombia, and reunited with my whole biological family, and actually met my father for the very first time, who was actually the man responsible for putting me in the orphanage. And it was a person I had actually never met, my father. And here I am in Colombia again, and it's just really powerful to talk to you right now because meeting my father was a very strong experience of trying to find forgiveness and rationally understanding that I needed to find that forgiveness. But emotionally, having to work with that was very difficult. And it wasn't until this time, now this is my third time in Colombia, I'm 32 years old, and I finally feel like my dad is one of my best friends, and I have nothing to forgive him for, and I have nothing held against him. And I'm curious from you, taking my own story here and other people's understanding that psychologically we can understand this idea of forgiveness or that depression is a mindset even, but then the emotions which seem to fuel us even more powerfully. How do we work with the emotions? Because I wonder, could I have somehow found the place where even forgiveness wasn't something part of my story with my dad, but emotionally it was a really hard place to get to? Is there a place that we can work with that maybe makes it even faster, if that makes sense?
First of all, I have a question. You were adopted by an American family? Who were you adopted by?
Yeah, so I was adopted I was born in the first 5 years of my life. My mother was a drug addict and locked me inside doors all day long pretty much, and then came home and did drugs. Then she was murdered. I was homeless for about 3 years with a homeless uncle. And then through kind of a sneaky way, my dad, who had never met, put me into an orphanage, and some people in the United States in Seattle, Washington wanted to adopt a child at that time. And I was adopted. And then when I was 18, I found a way to get a hold of my biological family and return to my homeland.
Well, in a way, didn't your father save your life?
He did save my life. Yes, he did save my life. And it took me a long time to understand that and to even use some biblical references, kind of like the story of Joseph, where one of the brothers was put into a hole, and then later he was found by the Pharaoh and kind of taken up. And to take that and see it as a blessing was a very difficult journey for me.
Yeah, I mean, it would seem to me to have been delivered from that situation where you were was the miracle, that he was the miracle worker in your life. I mean, the person who put you in a situation where you could get out of there. and get out of those horrible circumstances. So once again, as you came to think about the situation differently, then you saw his role in the trajectory of your life completely differently. Unless that part of your mind was saying that he should have taken you and raised you himself. Is that what the part of your mind that didn't forgive him said, that he should have taken you and raised you?
Well, so he took my sister, and she was the person I wanted to be with more than anybody else in the world. And so there was this kind of dynamic where I thought that, and other people kind of told me that. It's wild because as children, we don't really understand situations. So as a child, I didn't really see any of it as bad. But then growing up, people were, oh my gosh, that's so difficult. I'm so sorry for you. And adopting that story.
Oh, yeah. I mean, anyone at Columbia at that time, it's very possible that he saved your life. But let me ask you a question. So did your sister grow up with him and everything's good with her now?
Everything is pretty good. I mean, I would say that in some ways I'm emotionally healthier than she is. And she's a lot closer to a certain situation that was really difficult. So when I come back here in Columbia, there is a rule where I don't talk about certain things in regards to our past, just as a way to kind of, take care of her and her wishes. Whereas, I've come back and I kind of confront all of it.
Right. You're Americanized. So going back to what that analogy is, I think that an interesting contrast between a nation like Colombia and a nation like the United States, when you look at the terrible turmoil of a country like Colombia, and so many of the Central American countries, South American countries all over the world, the social conditions and the political environment was depressing for everyone. America is just realizing and just entering a phase of both experiencing that and recognizing that. So what happened in the United States was that the psychotherapeutic model that has been prevalent for the last 100 years is one in which there has been this focus on the individual sufferer. So you would look at a country like terrible things going on in a country like Colombia, and there was no way that the private citizen, only a very, very small portion of the Colombian population during that time had any level of protection from the craziness and the horrors that were going on. So it was understood that everyone would be emotionally affected by it. What's happened in the United States, until really what's happening right now, is that anybody who got upset, anybody who got depressed, the assumption was this had to do with their own individual story, their own individual drama. I'm depressed because of my divorce or my breakup. I'm depressed because I lost my job. I'm depressed because I lost this money. I'm depressed because my mother died. And so we haven't recognized that much of the prevalence, this lethargy and the supposedly the epidemic of depression that we have felt, has had to do with the larger construct that all of us are affected by, even, yes, here in the United States. For the longest time, we all bought into the story that because we have, in many ways, many blessings living in the United States, don't get me wrong. But until we recognize the underbelly to many aspects of our society, the toxic elements to many of our collective conditions, we fail to realize how those collective issues affect all of us on a personal level. And just like years ago, you took a teenager to therapy, the therapist would say, I cannot address the issues of the teenager without seeing them in the context of the larger dynamic of the social system that is your family. And now I think it's time for us to realize the same is true for us as adults. You can't really understand the larger psychological and emotional and spiritual drama of an individual living in America today without recognizing how that connects to the larger dynamic. The larger dynamic is one in which most people are economically stressed. Most people are led to believe that your value lies outside you and what you achieve and what you do rather than in who you are. We are led by the veil of illusion of the three-dimensional reality that we are separate rather than one, which leaves us either in a state of existential loneliness because we feel disconnected from that which on some level of our hearts we know we are one with, or at least meant to be one with. It leaves us either that or inappropriately needy and dependent on our connectivity with someone else or something outside ourselves. It leaves us in a situation where we are more apt to see other people as our competitors rather than our collaborators. It's turned relationships into transactions rather than deep communal experiences. And these are dysfunctions. These are spiritual dysfunctions. This is a twisting of a deep moral perspective that has pervaded the system. It's like a toxic gas. And so in the book, I talk about how you can't address the issues of every individual bout of suffering in a meaningful and fundamental way without recognizing all of the larger cultural attitudes. That's true when you talk about your father. You can't understand the story of your father, your sister, and you without addressing that it was Colombia during that awful time politically, right? So
Definitely.
You just can't, one without the other, and you just don't see the whole story. So that I think when you say, how can we make the emotional shift, going to that question, in the Old Testament, there was 40 years between the time that the Israelites first left Egypt and the time when they entered the Promised Land. And there was 3 days between the crucifixion and the resurrection in the New Testament. And there was that period of time after Buddha awakened to the fact that life is suffering. Then he had to go through his own trials and tribulations, where he fought off the god of the demonic gods and of illusion before he awakened in his enlightenment. So in all the great spiritual stories, it is recognized, acknowledged, and drawn very specifically that there is a period of time. The problem is not how do we make this time go faster. The problem is we think that it should go faster. And that, once again, is because we have taken this business model, the dictates of a business model, and imposed it on everything. So now, whereas when I was growing up, if you had a loved one, a family member who died, there was a lot more emotional and social permission given to the experience of grief. It was understood if your husband died, if your wife died, that it would be a year before you were yourself again. A year was considered natural. Today, we're more likely, because of this new medicalization, it's been too long. Maybe he should be in treatment. Maybe he should be taking something. It's interesting to me, particularly because, people talk about the wisdom of the body and the genius of the body. And everybody's going to get muscle testing because the body is such a genius. Well, if the body is such a genius, why don't we put tears in that same category? So if you have 45 tears to cry, who are we to saying, oh, no, you really should only cry 30 tears. And after that, it's a problem and you should seek treatment. And that's really what's going on in our society. So the first thing when you say what to do, get over those emotions, it's to recognize that's not the question we should be asking. The question we want to ask is, what are these emotions? What is the lesson for me to be learned from this? What is the wisdom that I can gain from this? If you switch the medical model to a spiritual model, then you see these dark nights of the soul as times of spiritual growth. Difficult, yes, but life can be difficult. And that's what we're all running away from. And when you're running away from the difficult seasons of life, you're actually saying, I am not choosing to learn how to navigate the troubled times. And if you don't know how to navigate the troubled times in life, you don't know how to navigate life. Because this earth is dominated by attitudes that then create behavior, both individually and collectively, that creates suffering. That's what Buddhism is about. That's what the Old Testament talks about. That's what a crucifixion is about. That's why in the book, I talk about the mystical understanding, the metaphysical understanding of the great spiritual and religious stories, because they are all spiritual transmissions. And when we dwell within the context, so you begin by realizing I am suffering. Where is the out? Where is the gap in my understanding? Where is the gap in the social understanding? So where's the gap in my understanding? That means number one, where is my suffering because of my own mistakes? Let me not run away from that. And let me atone for whatever part I played. So if you went through a bitter breakup, you went through a bitter divorce, you got fired from your job fell apart, you lost money. Every time I have been through any of those dramas, and I don't know anybody who hasn't been through the majority of those dramas on some level if you've lived long enough.
I'm still looking for that person.
Exactly. So what I've learned in my life, I know it theoretically, but I also know it viscerally. There was not one of those cases where my own behavior, my own thinking, my own behavior, my own attitudes, my own energy was not part of the problem. My literary agent stole the royalties on my first 3 books. Yeah. And what kind of woman hasn't checked her own royalty statements in 8 years? And on and on and on and on. That's part of the pain. You can't get the gain unless you go through that pain. Because if you don't get to the place where your eyes having been opened, however tearfully, you know that at the end of this, you will go forward in life and you will be smart where you were stupid before. You will be wise where you were unwise before. You would be brave where you were cowardly before. You will be humble. You will be humble where you were arrogant before. You will be appreciative where you were ungrateful before. You will be kind where you were harsh before. Because life, once you have a spiritual perspective, you understand the situation will be coming back. Every situation is going to come back around again. Other people, other places, other form. But that's all that life is lessons, constantly rehearsed. If I numb my pain, where am I going to get the wisdom? Now, that's one category where it was my own pain, my own mistakes that I have to look at. Catholics go to confession. The Jewish holiest day of the year is Yom Kippur, Day of the Atonement. In Alcoholics Anonymous, there's the taking of the fearless moral inventory. You have to recognize the nature of your own wrongs, atone for them, make amends for them, take responsibility for them. Those times are painful. And you say, what do we do with the painful emotions? Well, what you don't do is try to rush them. It's overwhelming to look at the kinds of things that I was just talking about. And you have to look at all of them, because unless you look at all of them, spiritually, we heal through a kind of detox. You can't pour pink paint over the stuff of your life. You can't pour light over the darkness. You have to bring the darkness to the light. You have to face the horror. You have to face the remorse. Only a sociopath has no conscience, has no remorse. So you have to burn through that.
So Marianne, it makes me, I have this burning question now. And because you're talking about something so interesting, and at the same time, having someone that's studied spirituality and New Age and religion in depth, what do you think about this kind of New Age thing where, you have a lot of teachers who are really espousing that if you're not happy pretty much all the time, you're doing something wrong, or if life isn't manifesting every single desire that you want at every single moment, that something is off in your guidance system or in your manifesting tools?
Well, that is not spiritual information. I mean, Jesus suffered on the cross, and the Jews were slaves in Egypt. And Buddha began his spiritual journey by realizing that life is suffering. So that's this kind of artificial spirit. I mean, you can call that all kinds of things. I don't know. I'm not here to judge it, but don't put any kind of spiritual moniker on it, because no great spiritual system. I mean, all the great religious systems and spirituality does derive from the mystical core of the religious traditions. None of them say that. It's just this new corporate. I mean, it's just like that's like saying I know you're asking me to comment on a philosophy that is just not the philosophy I'm talking about. So obviously what I'm saying is something very, very different than that.
I would love to hear from you how you apply, how we as a country, how we as a people, how we as a planet can apply some of these principles into our lives on a daily basis.
Yes, I'd like to go back if I might, because when I talked about the things we have to take the time to experience, I gave one of 3 categories. And if I might, real quickly, I want to go through the other categories. When we're depressed, it's not always because we did something wrong. I wanted to point out that part, but it's one of 3 major categories. The second category is that you have to forgive someone else for theirs. And if you are in pain because of, quote unquote, what someone did to you, and this is why in the book there's an entire chapter on forgiveness, which is the ultimate technique that you're asking about. If I'm in pain because of what someone, quote unquote, did to me, the spiritual issue there is, number one, you were not created to be at the effective lovelessness of anyone else. So someone could have hurt you on the level of circumstance, but no one can diminish your soul. Secondly, if I don't forgive that person, then, it's like they say, you can be bitter or you can be better. If I'm going to be happy on the other side of this, you cannot see yourself as a victim and be happy at the same time. So the ultimate antidote to depression is happiness. Happiness is not the absence of depression. Depression is the absence of happiness. And we are not, people say, oh, Marianne, you can't just think happy thoughts. But when they say that, they're talking about the kind of happiness, that faux artificial happiness stuff that you were just referring to a few minutes ago, Louise. Real happiness is where you realize only love is real here. And it is difficult getting to that. So if I am upset in pain because of what someone did to me, I got left, I got abandoned, someone fired me or whatever, unfairly. First of all, there's the issue of taking responsibility for my own life. The Course in Miracles says if you don't take 100% responsibility for your life, then you can't change it. But then the issue of forgiveness. To pray, let's say someone hurt you, you broke up painfully in a relationship. To pray for that person, may he be blessed, may he be happy, may he be loved. When really all you want to pray is, may he call and say he's sorry, may he come back to me, or may he, have scalding hot water poured all over him, son of a bitch, right? And when you ask me what are the techniques, these are the techniques. These are mental changes. The miracle is a shift in perception. And then the other major category is when we have lost someone that we loved. I've lost both parents. I've lost, Louise, you lost your mother. These are horrifying. I lost my sister, my best friend, and so forth. But then where is the wisdom there? Well, the wisdom is that I know, and viscerally, not just intellectually, that this mortal ride is exactly that. It's mortal. It is temporary. It will not last forever. And so this leads you to really suck the juice out of those things which remain, to really appreciate more the people who are in your life, because that's what life experience gives you. When you're younger and inexperienced, you take life for granted. And when you go through all these experiences of hardship, you come out on the other side, if you allow yourself to dwell within them spiritually, with such a deeper understanding of what it means to be human, how to live impeccably, how to live within the order of a moral universe, how to live in such a way that you do not create so much suffering for your pain, for yourself and others, and how to live in such a way that you are much less at the effect of what other people do to you. When you ask how to do it, once you know the laws of consciousness, if I focus on what you did to me, then I am dooming myself to emotionally be at the effect of what you did to me. Forgiveness means I'm willing to change my focus. And it doesn't happen in a minute, and it doesn't happen in a day. But you are willing to see it differently. Your prayer becomes, I'm willing to have another mental lens on this. I'm willing to understand that that's just an innocent child of God who didn't mean to hurt me, or even if they meant to hurt me, I am not created to be at the effect of this. And I can learn to exercise some mercy towards that person the way God shows mercy towards me. And only if I do, only if I'm willing to take the hook out of them, will the hook be out of me. So these are the spiritual techniques. That's why the book has a chapter on forgiveness and a chapter on relationships and a part about death and grief. Because when you ask, how do you do it? That's the only way to change your experience, is to rethink it. And everything comes from there.
So beautifully put. Before we close out today, are there any last thoughts that you want to leave the thriving launchers with?
We are living in very difficult times. As you and I are talking, the last 2 weeks have been just horrific here in the United States and around the world. We had 1 week with horrible events in Istanbul and Bangladesh and Baghdad. And then the next week, the horrible things that had happened with the shooting of Alton Sterling in Baton Rouge, and then Philando Castile in Minnesota, and then the shooting of the police in Dallas. There is no way to distract yourself anymore from what is going on effectively. You forget numbing yourself. And for that matter, it is appropriate to be sad when things are sad. And it is appropriate to be upset when things are upsetting. It is appropriate to be disturbed when things are disturbing. Where would we be if the abolitionists had not gotten upset? Where would we be if Susan B. Anthony had just known how to chill? So this is not a time to try to put yourself within some bubble, especially calling it spiritual, because there's nothing spiritual about that whatsoever. There is no deep religious or spiritual path, and never has been, that gives anyone a pass on addressing the suffering of other sentient beings. And so the issue is to either, these are revolutionary times. The revolution has begun. Your only choice is, am I going to proactively be part of the revolution of love, or do I choose to be at the effect of the revolution of fear? And I think that hope is born of participation in hopeful solutions. And as we declare that I will be here, I want my life to be used by a power higher than my own, by God as I understand God, that my life might be a conduit for the solution. You know, when you talk about Colombia and the horrors that occurred there, yes, and then there was transformation. And people, human beings caused those transformations. You know, human beings are conduits of the darkness, but human beings are conduits of the light. And it is only light that casts out darkness. So at this point, the issue is, will enough of us to form a real critical mass who already know that principle? I mean, God knows, there are enough share graphics out there. We got that. The issue is, will enough of us now apply what we know and expand our vision beyond our own individual pain and say, I will stand up, I will rise to the occasion of being a mature, conscious citizen on the planet at this time, that God might use me in whatever way would be valuable and helpful. Just like the cells of the body are assigned to certain organs of the body, we're assigned. You're assigned to the arts. You're assigned to business. You're assigned to education. You're assigned. You do this. You do a podcast. You write a book. You make a film. You start a business. You start a new educational system. You do science. When you see this, everything that is offered to us in terms of our life experience as our assignment, knowing that we can dwell within the space, whatever our space is, as it is now, not a different space, but the space you're in now, and pray in your own way to be a conduit of an alternative possibility there. May I be a conduit of love, because if I'm a conduit of love, in the moment I'm loving, I can't be fearful. In the moment I'm giving, the gift is not only to others, but to myself. I want to be used by the forces of light as a shining lamp in whatever place where I am. Then not only will the entire system, the entire country, the entire world transform, but one day we'll wake up and realize, wow, I'm happy, because that's the only place that happiness comes from.
Marianne Williamson, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the show today. And as we sign off, I want to say that I've been signed up for that same mission. And everyone here at Thriving Launch, we hope that all of you have enjoyed yourselves and are also signed up for this mission to be conduits of love. Kamala, will you sign us off, please?
It's been truly an honor to have you on the show. Thank you all for being here with Marianne Williamson on Thriving Launch.
Thank you so much for having me, guys.
You've been listening to the Thriving Launch podcast. For books and resources related to today's episode, make sure to head over to thrivinglaunch.com. We'll see you there.
Being mindful is one of the keys to having more happiness and joy and stillness in your life. So be sure to listen to our next episode with Locke Kelly, where we discuss mindfulness and how to apply it to your daily life.